In May of 1990, Susan Poupart walked out of a house party in northern Wisconsin and vanished into the darkness. 6 months later, hunters stumbled upon her remains in a forest so remote that some believe she was never meant to be found. What happened to Susan that night remains one of the most haunting mysteries in Native American history, and the answers might be more disturbing than anyone could imagine. Susan Poupart was 28 years old when she disappeared, a member of the Lac du Flambeau band of Lake Superior, Chippewa. She was a mother, a daughter, a friend. She had dreams, struggles, and a life that mattered. But on that spring night in 1990, something went terribly wrong. And here's what keeps investigators awake at night. Was Susan's disappearance random, or was she targeted because of who she was? Before we dive deeper into this case, if you're someone who believes these stories deserve to be told, that these victims deserve to be remembered, do me a favor. Hit that subscribe button right now. Turn on the notification bell so you never miss a case. And drop a comment telling me what country and city you're watching from. It helps us build a community of people who actually care about finding answers. Now let's get back to Susan. To understand what happened to Susan Poupart, we need to go back to the beginning. Back to a reservation in northern Wisconsin, where poverty and isolation created the perfect storm for tragedy. The Lac du Flambeau Reservation sits in Vilas County, Wisconsin. It's beautiful country, all pine forests and pristine lakes. But beneath that natural beauty lies a harsh reality. In 1990, the reservation struggled with unemployment, limited resources, and a law enforcement system that many felt didn't prioritize Native American lives. Susan grew up in this environment, navigating challenges that most people will never understand. Those who knew Susan describe her as resilient. She had faced hardships, yes, but she was fighting to build a better life. She was the kind of person who would give you her last dollar if you needed it. She loved her family fiercely, and on May 12, 1990, she decided to go to a party. It was supposed to be a normal night, just friends gathering, music playing, people trying to forget their problems for a few hours. Susan arrived at a house party in the town of Mercer, Wisconsin, just a short drive from the reservation. Witnesses remember seeing her there, talking, laughing, seemingly having a good time. But as the night wore on, something changed. Around midnight, Susan told people she was leaving. Some say she was going to walk home. Others claim she mentioned getting a ride. The details are fuzzy, contradictory, the way they always are when alcohol is involved and memories fade. What we know for certain is this. Susan Poupart left that party, and she was never seen alive again. When Susan didn't come home that night, her family immediately knew something was wrong. This wasn't like Susan. She always let someone know where she was. She had responsibilities, people who depended on her. Her family started making calls, asking questions, retracing her steps. They went to the police. And here's where the story takes its first disturbing turn. The response from law enforcement was lukewarm at best. There was no massive search operation, no Amber Alert equivalent for adults, no helicopters scanning the woods. Susan's family was told that she was an adult, that maybe she had just left on her own, that she'd probably turn up. But her family knew better. They knew Susan wouldn't just disappear without a word, so they did what they had to do. They searched themselves. For days, then weeks, then months. Susan's family and community members combed through the forests around Mercer. They walked the roads. They knocked on doors. They followed every rumor, every possible lead, and they found nothing. It was as if Susan had been erased from existence. But someone out there knew what happened. Someone always knows. As spring turned to summer and summer faded into fall, hope began to dim. The searches became less frequent. Life, as it cruelly does, started moving forward. But Susan's family never stopped believing they'd find her. They just didn't expect it to happen the way it did. November 1990, 6 months after Susan disappeared, 2 hunters were deep in the woods of Iron County, just across the border from where Susan was last seen. They were tracking deer through dense forest when they noticed something that didn't belong, a piece of clothing, then another, and then they saw her. Susan's remains were found in a heavily wooded area, far from any road or trail. She was partially concealed, her body in an advanced state of decomposition. The location was so remote, so carefully chosen, that investigators immediately suspected foul play. This wasn't an accident. This wasn't someone who got lost and succumbed to the elements. This was murder. The autopsy revealed few concrete answers. After 6 months exposed to the elements and wildlife, determining cause of death was nearly impossible. There were no obvious signs of gunshot wounds or blunt force trauma to the skull. But that doesn't mean she wasn't killed. Strangulation, suffocation, stabbing to soft tissue, all of these could leave minimal evidence after so much time. The medical examiner could only classify her death as suspicious, unable to determine exactly how she died. But here's what the crime scene did tell investigators. Whoever left Susan's body in those woods knew the area. They knew it well. This wasn't someone randomly driving through who panicked and dumped a body. This was deliberate. This was someone who understood that this particular spot would keep secrets. And that realization opened up a terrifying possibility. What if the killer was someone from the community? Someone Susan knew? Investigators began the painstaking process of interviewing everyone who had been at that party. They created a timeline of Susan's last known hours. They looked into her personal life, her relationships, anyone who might have had a motive. And they hit wall after wall after wall. The problem with cases like this is that time is the enemy. Memories fade, people move away, evidence degrades, and in a small, tight-knit community, loyalty can be stronger than the desire for justice. People who might have seen something suddenly can't remember. Witnesses become unreliable. Stories change, and the truth gets buried deeper with each passing day. One of the most frustrating aspects of Susan's case is the lack of a clear suspect. There were rumors, of course. There are always rumors. Some pointed to someone Susan had been in a relationship with. Others suggested she had witnessed something she shouldn't have. There was talk of drug activity in the area, of dangerous people who didn't want attention from law enforcement. But rumors aren't evidence. And without evidence, there can be no arrest. The investigation into Susan's death continued for months, then years. Detectives followed up on tips that led nowhere. They re-interviewed witnesses who had nothing new to say. They sent evidence to be tested and retested as forensic technology improved. And still, nothing. No breakthrough. No smoking gun. No confession. Just a family left with questions and a community left with fear. Because here's what everyone was thinking, but few were saying out loud. If this could happen to Susan, it could happen to anyone. Susan's case didn't exist in a vacuum. It was part of a much larger, much darker pattern that was happening across North America. A pattern that law enforcement and media had largely ignored. A pattern that indigenous communities had been screaming about for decades. Missing and murdered indigenous women. Let's talk about something that should shock you, but probably won't surprise you. Native American women are murdered at rates more than 10 times the national average. They go missing at alarming rates, and their cases receive a fraction of the media attention that cases involving white women do. In 1990, when Susan disappeared, this crisis was already decades in the making. But almost nobody outside of indigenous communities was paying attention. Why is this happening? The answers are complex and uncomfortable. Historic trauma from centuries of genocide and forced assimilation. Jurisdictional nightmares that allow criminals to exploit gaps between tribal, state, and federal law enforcement. Poverty and isolation that makes certain communities vulnerable. And perhaps most insidiously, a systemic devaluation of indigenous lives that makes it easier for society to look away. Susan's family knew all of this. They had seen other women from their community disappear. They had watched as cases went cold, as families were left without answers, as killers walked free. And now it was happening to them. But they refused to let Susan become just another statistic. They kept fighting. They kept her name alive. They demanded justice even when it seemed impossible. The investigation into Susan's murder officially remains open. That means, technically, law enforcement is still working on it. But let's be honest about what an open cold case really means. It means that unless new evidence literally falls into investigators' laps, nothing is happening. The file sits in a box. The photos gather dust, and the person responsible for taking Susan's life goes on living theirs. Over the years, there have been moments when it seemed like a breakthrough might be coming. A tip would come in. A witness would come forward with new information. Technology would advance, offering the possibility of extracting DNA from old evidence. Each time, Susan's family would allow themselves to hope, and each time, that hope would be crushed when the lead went nowhere. One of the most promising developments came in the early 2000s, when advances in DNA analysis offered the possibility of identifying genetic material from Susan's clothing or from the crime scene. Evidence was submitted for testing. The family waited, and the results came back inconclusive. Either the samples were too degraded, or there simply wasn't enough viable DNA to create a profile. Another door closed. But here's something investigators have never been able to explain. How did Susan get to that remote location where her body was found? She didn't have a car that night. The area where she was discovered was miles from where she was last seen, accessible only by four-wheel drive vehicles or on foot through difficult terrain. Someone had to transport her there, which means someone had to have a vehicle, which means there should be witnesses who saw something. Think about it. It's May in northern Wisconsin. Tourist season is starting. There are people on the roads, people at the lakes, people in the woods. Someone drove through that area with Susan, either alive or dead, in their vehicle. Someone possibly returned to that spot to ensure the body wouldn't be found. And in all that time, in all those trips, nobody saw anything unusual? That seems impossible. Unless people did see something and chose not to come forward. This is where we have to confront an ugly truth about Susan's case. There's a very real possibility that people in the community know exactly what happened. They know who was involved. They know why Susan died. But they're protecting someone, maybe out of fear, maybe out of misplaced loyalty, maybe because they don't trust law enforcement. Whatever the reason, their silence has allowed a killer to remain free for over 3 decades. Let's go back to that party, the last place Susan was seen alive. Dozens of people were there. Dozens of people saw her. Dozens of people potentially saw her leave. And yet, when investigators tried to piece together what happened, they got contradictory stories. Some said Susan left alone. Others said she left with someone. Some couldn't remember seeing her leave at all. How is that possible? There are really only 2 explanations. Either people genuinely don't remember because they were intoxicated, or people are lying. And if people are lying, we have to ask why. What are they protecting? Who are they protecting? The answer to those questions is the answer to what happened to Susan Poupart. Let's consider the possibilities of what happened that night. Theory 1. Susan accepted a ride from someone she knew, someone she trusted. That person took her to that remote location, killed her, and left her body there. This theory makes sense because Susan wouldn't have gotten into a car with a stranger. She was street smart. She understood danger. Whoever killed her was someone she felt safe with, at least initially. Theory 2. Susan witnessed something at that party or shortly after leaving, something criminal, something dangerous, and she was silenced because of it. This would explain why people's stories don't line up. If there was illegal activity happening that night, people would have reason to lie to protect themselves or others. Theory 3. Susan's death was connected to the broader epidemic of violence against Indigenous women. She was targeted specifically because she was Native American, because her killer believed her death wouldn't be thoroughly investigated, wouldn't receive media attention, wouldn't result in consequences. And tragically, that calculation was partially correct. Any of these theories could be true. All of them could be partially true. But without someone coming forward, without someone finally telling the truth, we may never know. What we do know is this. Susan Poupart deserved better. She deserved better from the systems that were supposed to protect her. She deserved better from the community that should have rallied around finding her killer. She deserved to live, to raise her children, to grow old, to be more than a cautionary tale or a cold case file. Her family has spent 35 years living with an absence that can never be filled. Every birthday, every holiday, every major life event happens with Susan's ghost in the room. They've had to watch as her children grew up without their mother. They've had to carry the weight of not knowing, the torture of unanswered questions, the rage of injustice. And here's what keeps me up at night about this case. Someone out there knows what happened. Maybe they were directly involved. Maybe they saw something. Maybe they heard something secondhand. But they know, and they've chosen silence over justice. They've chosen to protect a killer over honoring Susan's memory. They've chosen to let a family suffer rather than face whatever consequences might come from telling the truth. If you're that person, if you're watching this right now and you know something about what happened to Susan Poupart, understand this. It's not too late. It's never too late to do the right thing. You can provide anonymous tips. You can reach out through intermediaries. You can finally unburden yourself of a secret that has likely haunted you for decades. Susan's family deserves answers. Susan deserves justice. For those of you who have watched this entire video, who have taken 2 hours to learn about Susan's life and death, I want to ask you something. Don't let this be just another true crime story you consume and forget. Share this video. Talk about Susan. Talk about the epidemic of missing and murdered Indigenous women. Demand that law enforcement prioritize these cases. Demand that media give these stories the attention they deserve. Demand change. The Lac du Flambeau community has never forgotten Susan. Every year they hold memorials. They say her name. They keep her spirit alive. But remembrance isn't enough. Susan needs justice, and justice requires action. Technology has advanced dramatically since 1990. DNA analysis has become exponentially more sophisticated. Digital forensics can uncover information that was invisible 30 years ago. There are investigative genetic genealogy techniques that have solved cold cases decades old. Susan's case could be solved. It should be solved. It deserves the resources and attention necessary to finally bring her killer to justice. But that only happens if people care, if people demand it. If this case doesn't fade back into obscurity the moment you click away from this video. Susan Popart was 28 years old. She was a daughter, a mother, a member of a community that loved her. She had hopes and dreams and people who needed her. And on a spring night in 1990, someone took all of that away. Not just from Susan, but from everyone who loved her. As we close this chapter, I want you to sit with something. Imagine if Susan was your daughter, your sister, your mother, your friend. Imagine living for 35 years not knowing what happened to her, not knowing if her killer is someone you pass on the street, not knowing if justice will ever come. Could you bear that weight? Could you survive that uncertainty? Susan's family has had to, and they've done it with a grace and strength that most of us can't even comprehend. This case remains unsolved. But unsolved doesn't mean unsolvable. Somewhere, buried in old evidence or locked in someone's memory, is the key to what happened to Susan Popart. And maybe, just maybe, this video will be the thing that shakes it loose. Maybe someone watching right now will finally decide that enough is enough, that silence has gone on long enough, that Susan deserves better. If this story moved you, if you believe Susan's life mattered, hit that subscribe button, turn on notifications, because next week, we're covering a case that will absolutely leave you speechless. A case with twists you won't see coming. And trust me, you won't want to miss it. Susan Popart walked into the darkness in May of 1990 and never came home. Her body was found 6 months later in a forest that tried to keep her hidden forever. But her story refuses to be buried. Her memory refuses to fade, and her family refuses to stop fighting. So here's my question for you, and I really want you to think about this before you answer in the comments. If you had information about Susan's death, but coming forward meant risking your own safety or betraying someone you cared about, what would you do?